Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. No slight underdogs in Fort Worth, Texas this weekend. That is because TCU, the reigning national runners-up. Last time we saw them getting boat raced by Georgia. It doesn't change the fact that it was an incredible year for Sonny Dykes and that group. They play Colorado, Coach Prime, Deion Sanders this coming weekend. Spread, TCU a 20.5-point favorite in the Betfred Sportsbook. The over-under in this game is 63.5. And really, I would say this, is that I think this is kind of a new beginnings type game for both teams when you really think about it. TCU has to replace a lot off that national championship runner-up. Oh, by the way, Colorado's got a bunch of new players on that roster. Because it's Coach Prime, because it's Deion Sanders, let's start with Colorado. And let me say this about Coach Prime. There's been so much talk about what he did this offseason and why did he do this and why did these guys do that. Let me defend Coach Prime. When you take over a roster as bad as Colorado is, you got to boot some of those kids to the curb. I looked it up and I couldn't believe this. You know that Colorado ranked in the bottom 5 nationally in scoring offense and scoring defense? You know how bad you have to be to have one of the 5 worst offenses in college football and one of the 5 worst defenses in college football? It's one thing to be like a Cliff Kingsbury or a Lincoln Riley and be great on one side of the ball and mediocre at the other. To be mediocre on both sides, it speaks to what Coach Prime had to do this offseason. By the way, a couple more stats really quickly, just to give you a feel for how bad this was. I went back and looked at some of the final scores. Colorado, these were some of their losses last year. They lost by 31 points to Air Force. Air Force. 42-point loss to Minnesota. 23-point loss to Arizona. 33-point loss to Oregon State. 39-point loss to Oregon. 33-point loss to USC. 47-point loss to Utah, or to Washington, 42 points to Utah. I mean, that's a lot of really bad losses. So that is why Coach Prime had to do what he did. Now, in terms of the big names you need to know from the Colorado perspective, you probably know them by now, right? Shedeur Sanders is in at quarterback. And I'll defend not only Coach Prime, but Shedeur for a minute. Like, for everybody that's just, Colorado, Coach Prime thinks this is going to be. Here's what you need to know about Shedeur. Shedeur was a player that was offered by Alabama coming out of high school. He is not in this stage, at this stage, whatever, because of who his father is. He is an FBS Power 5 caliber quarterback who just so happened to be playing at the FCS level for Jackson State last year. Stats last year, by the way, were absolutely incredible. 70% completion percentage, 40 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I get that it's a major step up. I would also say this, not going to be playing a very good defense, at least this coming weekend. We'll get to TCU in a minute. In addition to Shedeur Sanders, the other names you need to know, a lot of skill position talent on offense. Jimmy Horn, wide receiver from South Florida. Xavier Weaver, wide receiver from South Florida. Obviously, Travis Henry is a guy that is going to play on both sides of the football. Alton McCaskill, really highly regarded running back, was a little bit banged up last year at Houston. Not a little bit banged up. He tore his ACL, but they think he's going to be good to go. And Coach Prime, in a short amount of time, did a pretty good job in recruiting, adding a bunch of skill position guys. Dylan Edwards, 4-star, who had been committed to Notre Dame. He was there for the spring. Amarion Miller had been committed to Nebraska. As far as the defensive side of the ball, the offensive line, we know the issues there. And I think that's ultimately what keeps Coach Prime Coach Prime in Colorado from having a ton of success this year. The depth on the offensive line, the defensive line just isn't good enough. Now, from the TCU perspective, let me say this. I do think in life, 2 things can be true. What TCU did was awesome last year. 13-2, they finished. They were the Big 12 runners-up. Remember, they didn't win the Big 12 championship, but they beat Michigan to play for a college football national championship. And it was a great season. And I was at the game. talked to TCU fans after. It was a dream season, even if it didn't work out the way that they wanted. With that said, they do have a lot to replace this year. Remember, Max Duggan, Heisman Trophy finalist, no longer there. You probably know about that. Kendre Miller, leading rusher, no longer there. Quentin Johnston, first-round wide receiver, no longer there. And in total, I don't think people realize this, TCU had 8 players drafted off last year's roster, which was one of the highest totals in all of college football. Defensively, they need to do a lot of work. Now, I should say, before I even get to the defense, I do want to give Sonny Dykes credit. Great play caller, great offensive mind, and he did a good job of fixing things in the portal and adding talent in the portal. Trey Sanders, former Alabama running back, is in. JoJo Earl, former Alabama wide receiver, is in. And oh, by the way, JP Richardson, Oklahoma star wide receiver, is in as well. Where my concern for TCU comes in is if that offense even takes half a step back. The defense was not very good last year. Overall, TCU's defense, how about this? They ranked 89th nationally in points per game allowed, just under 30 points per game allowed. They ranked 94th nationally in yards per game allowed, over 400 yards per game. 78th nationally in rush defense, 96th nationally in pass defense. Now, maybe the pass defense was because they got up big in some games, whatever. But keep in mind, they didn't even get up that big in a lot of games. This was a team that had several big comebacks last season. You go back to some of those games that they played. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, you obviously had the walk-off win against Baylor. You had, I'm just trying to think of some of these other games. They were down 28-17 when they played Kansas State in the regular season, ended up winning that game. They trailed 17-14 against Texas Tech going into the fourth quarter. How about this? They trailed 27-13 against Oklahoma State midway through the third and ended up winning in 2 overtimes. And so when I look at TCU, if the offense even takes half a step back, the defense wasn't very good last year, and they won a lot of close games. Because of it, I'll just be blunt. I said when the week 1 lines came out back in May or June or whenever it was, I said Colorado plus the 3 touchdowns is my official best bet. And 2.5, 3 months later, I'm not backing down from it. I look at this matchup, and what stands out to me, Shedeur Sanders Shedeur Sanders and that offense are going to be able to move the ball. Are they going to be great? Are they going to be perfect? No. When they play Oregon, when they play the better defenses in this league, Utah later in the year, are they going to put up 60 points? Of course not. But against this TCU defense that gave up 30 points a game last year, they're going to be able to move the ball. And so when I look at this game, I think the 20.5 points are way too many for this Colorado team. I believe Colorado is way more talented than people give them credit for. And I believe Coach Prime is a way better coach than people give him credit for. Remember, 12-1 last year, 11-2 the year before, and one of those losses was to an FBS program. So my official Betfred best bet for this game and for this week in week 1 is Colorado plus 20.5. I think they cover. I think they keep it competitive. I think there's even a scenario where they win, but I'll just make the bet at 20.5 and stick with that.